We're on. Perfect. So look, there's some Bible stories you guys know, and I don't need to tell you. That's a struggle as a preacher, honestly, sometimes, because I'm telling you the same story you've heard 138 times in your life. It's hard to know like how you approach that. And this morning's story is it's one of those, right? It's a story where Jesus calms the storm. You all know that story. You know that one night Jesus and his disciples, they went out in a boat and a storm hit, and it was like a bad storm. It was a crazy storm, and they took on water, and Jesus calms the storm. He tells the storm to sit down and shut up, essentially, and that's it. We're done. That's the end of the story. And the story is meant to communicate to us that Jesus, being God, is able to do miraculous, powerful things like control the weather. It's a ready-made story for children's church, Sunday school, vacation Bible school, a kid's Bible. It's a ready-made story that you can reference at different times, and it's just one of those stories that you don't really need to go deeper than the surface level to get something out of it, and that's great, and that's nice. But obviously, like I said, like as a preacher, it's hard to know what to do sometimes because do I just tell you the story you already know? Do I just pretend like you've never heard it? Do I try to give you pieces of information, historical context, things like that make you think about it in a different way? But what am I trying to do here with this story that you so very obviously know? Because I don't want to be the guy that treats you like an idiot. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes it when, I don't want to patronize you and be like, hey, have you heard of the Bible? Like, I don't want to be that guy. So it's hard. And so usually what happens, for preachers like me, usually when we have a story like this, we kind of zero in on the people, right? So like, obviously, so Jesus is God. It's hard to relate to him sometimes. I know we're supposed to relate to him. That's the whole point of the incarnation. But it's hard to relate to God in the flesh because that's not me or you. So then we start thinking about, okay, well, let's add to the point. Let's pile on to the point by talking about some of the people. And this is, again, a ready-made story for piling on and adding to the point when you think about the people. Because you have 12 disciples who are the 12. It was a lot more disciples than that, but the 12 that are supposed to all become apostles, and most of them do. 4 of them, a third of the group, are fishermen. And not just fishermen, they're night fishermen. They're people who their entire life before they met Jesus was committed to going out under the moon, under the stars, in the middle of the night, like without electricity on their boats, and going out and fishing in darkness. In other words, they shouldn't have been afraid of a storm. This was a storm at night. They shouldn't have been afraid of weather. They shouldn't have been bothered by waves and winds and thunder, lightning. None of that should have bothered them. This was a feature, not a bug to their life, is what I'm saying. Peter, Andrew, James, John, these people, this is what they did. And so what a preacher might do when telling a story is it's not just any ordinary storm. We're not just talking about like, any kind of storm. It is the kind of storm that even seasoned veteran fishermen, people who had given their lives to this, could not handle, right? It's kind of like, I don't know if you guys remember Easter, we had some storms around here. And Stephanie and I have lived in our house since 2006. And Stephanie is very cautious when it comes to the weather, and she's often like, hey, there's a storm outside. Should we go somewhere? And I always remind her, like, we live on a slab. Where do you want me to go? Like, we don't have a basement to hide in. That's nothing like that. What are we supposed to do? And she was like, okay, well, we've got a bathroom that doesn't have windows, obviously, because the bathroom, you don't put windows in your bathroom when you build a house. And so you can go in there and be safe from the storm. And for, since 2006, I've told Stephanie, no, it's fine. We'll be fine. We're Midwestern people. If the tornado gets us, the tornado gets us. Like, how idiots are. And so since 2006, that's been my thing. Well, Easter, I don't know if y'all remember how crazy Easter was. Like, I pulled Stephanie, I pulled both dogs into that bathroom. You sit on this toilet seat because this is we got, like, it was scary, right? So you guys remember Easter, how scary? So, like, the storm that Jesus calms on this boat was like the Easter scary storm. It was the storm that even if you don't usually care about storms, it was that kind of a storm. Even if you usually are fine, it was that kind of, it wasn't fine. So that's usually what we do with this story, is we just tell it like that. And then the whole point is just, hey, Jesus is God and neat, into the sermon. The thing about this story, though, is as familiar as it is, and as something we know, and I'm not saying like the main point is not a good point. Jesus is God, and Jesus can do whatever, and that includes this, controlling the weather, and great. The thing about it is the people who were there did not react to this in an old hat kind of a way. In fact, the reaction, if you read the story in the Bible, the reaction from these people was not okay, Jesus is God, cool kind of a thing. The reaction to the story we read in the Gospel according to Luke, this is what we read. At the end of this is after Jesus, he calms the storm. It says, the disciples were terrified and amazed. Who is this man, they asked each other. When he gives a command, even the wind and waves obey him. Now, this is absolutely, as far as I can tell, and look, I could be wrong. Maybe you'll find another story where the wording is the exact way, that's like this. But this is the only story in the entirety of the New Testament where that is the reaction from the people who witnessed a miracle. Okay? Now I got to qualify that. A lot of times when Jesus does a miracle, you see that people are amazed. People, it's awe-inspiring. Oh, it's so, it's awesome. It's amazing. I can hardly believe it. It's great. That's one reaction that people have towards miracles a lot of times because, Jesus is out here doing things that we just don't think are possible. And so very often people who witness the miracles of Jesus, they are just inspired. It's just awe-inspiring for them. They're amazed. So that's a reaction you can have. On the other hand, sometimes you read in the Bible, and it's less common. That's a really common one. Less common, but absolutely repeated, multiple times in the Bible, it happens, is that when people see a miracle of Jesus, they get scared. Right? Like there's something that it's not just, it freaks us out to see that. And I think the reason is it freaks us out to see power like that. Like we all watch superhero movies and we all think, oh, we would cheer for these guys. No, man, if Superman showed up, you'd be terrified of him. Because he can do literally anything. He can do anything. And anything is scary. We like things that are predictable. We like being able to set our watches to the idea of this is what happens in this time, this is what happens with these people, this is what happens at this place. We like the comfort of familiarity. But there are some things that are so powerful, that's what scares. That's what's scary. That's why the disciples were scared, right? Because they were used to a storm. They were used to, wind and waves and thunder and lightning, all that. But this one went beyond their expectation. It went beyond what they understood. It went beyond their lived experience. So they don't know how this is going to end. They know how storms usually end, but this storm is bigger, stronger, more powerful. They don't know how that storm ends. That's what made it frightening. And Jesus was the same way. They know rabbis. They know teachers. They know people explaining God. And they, even at this point in the ministry, they've seen Jesus do some level of miracle that, like, oh, hey, that sick person gets healed, or that person, has a demon and he casts it out, or whatever. They're able to have an understanding that's built on predictability. But this storm being calmed showed a power that was unpredictable. And that was terrifying. Because when anything is on the table, anything's on the table. When anything can happen, anything can happen. And we don't want anything to happen. We want the things we like to happen. And so this moment for these people, for the disciples, for Peter, John, and Andrew and James and the other 8, it was awe-inspiring, but at the same time, they were terrified. This is the only miracle in the entirety of the New Testament where we see both of those ideas brought together under one roof in one reaction. It's not one or the other, it's both of them together. And of course, the question is, why? Like we said it a little bit already, but there's, what specifically went on that made them have both reactions? And I think if you look at the story closer, I think that you see something that's really kind of inexplicable that really helps explain the why you had the fear and the amazement all together, a unique thing. Okay, so the disciples are on the boat. There's a storm. Let's give some context and background. They're on the boat. Everything's happening. And they decide we need Jesus' help, which is always a good thing to decide. They decide they need Jesus' help, but they can't find Jesus. And so they have to go looking for Jesus. And this is what we read this time in the Gospel according to Mark, where they found Jesus. It says, Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we are going to drown?" Okay, I know it sounds like a stupid detail. I love these details in these Bible stories that seem stupid because, again, we've talked about like they didn't have a lot of paper, so everything in there has meaning. Everything in there, it's there for a reason. Mark put something in here on purpose, and Mark decided to tell us that not only was Jesus sleeping, but he was sleeping with a cushion. Here's what this does not mean. This does not mean that at the end of a long day, Jesus sat down and fell asleep. It's not what that means. This does not mean that Jesus sat down and said, "Well, gonna rest my eyes just a little bit." And then was snoring 16 seconds later like everyone's grandpa in that situation. Okay? Like, there was nothing accidental about it because he had a cushion. He had a pillow. Like, he might as well have gotten a teddy bear and a blanket and a glass of warm milk, okay? Like, he intentionally said, I am going to go to sleep now, and I am going to do so as comfortably as possible. Now, look, I don't know what your knee does when it's going to storm. Like, maybe you're one of those guys, it's like, I can just feel it right here. I don't know if that's you. I don't know. I don't know. I always love the people like, it's my hip. Like, you should go and be a weather person then, because they don't know what they're talking about. Your hip does. Offer your services, sir. I don't know if that's what, I don't think that was Jesus. I have no reason to believe that he had an old, basketball injury and that's what had happened. I don't know. What I know, though, is every person in this room knows when it's going to rain sometimes. Like, you can just feel it in the air. You can see a cloud if you can't feel it. Like the air kind of changes. Gets like in the summertime, it gets like real heavy out of nowhere. And you're like, oh, it's gonna rain. Better get in, better get in somewhere because it's about to, like, what it feels like? Everybody has that. Jesus knew it was gonna rain. And look, even if you couldn't feel it, like maybe this was one of those pop-up storms that nobody. Remember, Jesus is God. He knows the future. He knows people's thoughts. I'm pretty sure what the clouds are going to do is not a mystery to him. So what this means is when the disciples say, Jesus, don't you care that we're going to die? That feeling, it came from a real place. And it came from not just an honest place, but an accurate place. Jesus would have known the storm was coming. Jesus would have known what the storm was going to do. The man is, if nothing else, a prophet who, knows things. He's a man who knows things. He knows it's going to rain. They probably knew it was going to rain. And in the midst of all of this, he chose to get the pillow and lay down comfortably and sleep. And yeah, that's cool to think about, like Jesus being, so in control that he can, casually, be casual about something that could kill us, right? But again, that's really, really scary. It's terrifying that not only is Jesus able to calm the storm, but that the storm is such a nothing thing to him that he'll just intentionally sleep through it like a baby. That is amazing, and it's also terrifying. And I'll tell you why it's terrifying, because it's the Superman principle. When anything is on the table, anything is on the table. And it's very clear after this story that Jesus has a power, and he can do anything he wants to with that power. And of course, in the back of your head, while you might be following this man as a rabbi, in the back of your head, while you might be hearing him talk about, peace and love and forgiveness and inclusion and everything else, and while he's still Jesus, don't get me wrong, there's part in the back of your head that says, but what if he changes his mind? Like, what if he gets cranky? I remember the day that Jesus gets real cranky and just like destroys a tree. He's like, you don't have breakfast for me. You'll never be a tree again. Like, he did it, like cranky Jesus killing trees. Take that, Earth Day. Like, there's a part of you that in the back of your head, you're thinking, am I safe? Right? Am I safe? Now, all of this reminds me of the song that we started this morning with. We're doing this series. Stephanie talked about it during communion. It's the third year we've done it. It's not been 3 years in a row. It's 3 and like 3 out of 5. But this is our third time we've done this. We're like, look, we sing songs for like ever, and I know like some of you guys love some of you guys are like, I just want it to stop. So we sing 5 songs every Sunday morning, always. And some of you guys are like, we could do 3. And some of you guys are like, we could do let's sing all day. I get it. But music is universal. And in the church, songs are always really at the core of what we do. They're all kind of mini sermons. And so I feel like it's important that if we're going to sing these songs, that we should talk about them and explain them and give some background and give some context and help us to give something to think about, while we're singing. And we started this morning with a song that, honestly, as a total aside of the sermon that doesn't mean a lot, there was a couple years ago, I was looking up the most popular hymns of all time. And somebody did this poll online of the most popular 200 hymns of all time. And number 1 was, of course, as Amazing Grace. Of course, number 1 is Amazing Grace. And because of course it's Amazing Grace. It can't be anything but Amazing Grace. So the question is, what's number 2? And number 2 is How Great Thou Art. And it knocked me over with a feather. I had I wouldn't have put that in the top 25, much number 2. Everybody, I just said Old Rugged Cross or something, whatever, number 2. So, okay, here we go. So let's talk about How Great Thou Art. How Great Thou Art, interestingly enough, was also written about a storm. It doesn't mention it in the song, but it is directly a song about a storm. There's a guy in about 150 years ago. His name was Karl Boberg. And Karl Boberg was a Christian. He was a poet. He was a writer. He was all these things. And one day he had a church meeting, and he lived in Swedish. He's Swedish. It's a Swedish song. I'm not sure you guys realize that. It's Swedish. And he lived in this small town that was on the water in Sweden. And he was walking home from a church meeting, and just the heavens opened, and the craziest storm he's ever seen just descended on this town. It came off the water, so it was started on the water, and it just came into the town, and nobody could predict it. Nobody knew it was coming, and it was the most violent storm he said he had ever seen. I mean, more rain, more lightning. It was one of those things you guys have been outside during a storm, especially in the summer, it'll be 85 degrees, and then it's 61. It just the temperature drops and the wind. I mean, just everybody going indoors, everybody freaking out. And this crazy storm happens. And then after just a few minutes, it just stops. And the sun comes out and everything's cool. And Karl Boberg is like, man, that's amazing. And he had just been to church. He had just been thinking about Jesus and God and the Bible and everything else. Of course. And he had just been to church, and he was, walking home. And by the time he got home, he's just thinking about just how incredible, how great God is. Right? That if the God who made the world could make that storm, but then also make the storm go away, He wrote how great thou art, and he wrote it just like in an instant. Just writes down he wrote down a bunch of verses. He picks the three. He's there, and we're done. It's over. There's the song. Second most beloved hymn in according to this poll that anybody's ever had. The interesting thing for him is his reaction to the storm was awe. Like we just sang the song, like how great thou art is a song about how God is awesome. Right? Like how God's power and grace and mercy and love, it's amazing. So the question is this. If the disciples, who are literally hanging out with Jesus, see Jesus do this and then are afraid as well as awe-inspired, why is it that a guy 150 years ago witnesses the worst storm he's ever seen? He is awe-inspired enough to write this song, like on the spot, but he's not. There's nothing in it that's afraid. I don't know if you saw it. I don't know if you we sang the song like in its entirety. There's no fear there. Why does he not have fear? And the disciples do when they go through largely the same experience. And I think the answer is, as much as we want to believe that the disciples know things we don't, and sometimes they do, but as much as we like to think that they always do, I think we should give ourselves enough credit to say that on this side of history, we know a lot more than they did. We have information to draw from they didn't have. So, for example, in the second verse of How Great Thou Art, he sings about how God did not keep his son from us and Christ died for us so we could live, right? He is on the other side of the cross. And what that means is he knows things that the 12 disciples don't know. And so we should talk about one of those things. Okay, I've been talking about what it's like to be a preacher a little bit. It's been a little bit autobiographical. And sometimes when you're a preacher, you have to make tough choices. So around Easter time, those choices are largely made for you. Like, I don't know, like, you guys don't know this, but if you were to go back to like years of my preaching, around Easter time, it's all the same. Like, I'm man enough to admit that. I try to make it different. I try to do like different jokes, different references, like I'm not referencing Game of Thrones anymore. Like there was a time when that was like every week because we're all watching it. We don't do that anymore. Okay. But like, it's all kind of the same. But what's interesting is there's things we leave out too, because we like very clean stories, very clean narratives. And sometimes verses kind of muddy the water a little bit and add confusion. And so there's this story that I probably should have told you around Easter time, and I didn't, because it's, it takes us down a rabbit trail. Let's go down that rabbit trail. So, you guys know, like the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is going and he's praying and, he's, make sure that he's ready for the cross. And then, the Judas comes with some folks and they arrest him and he goes and crucifixion, right? Here's part of that story that we didn't talk about at Easter, but is in the Gospel according to John. This is what we read about that. It says, the leading priests and Pharisees had given Judas a contingent of Roman soldiers and temple guards to accompany him. Now with blazing torches, lanterns, and weapons, they arrived at the olive grove. Jesus fully realized what was going to happen to him, so he stepped forward to meet them. Who are you looking for? He asked. Jesus the Nazarene, they replied. I am he, Jesus said. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. And as Jesus said, I am he, they all drew back and fell to the ground. Once more, he asked them, who are you looking for? And again, they replied, Jesus the Nazarene. I told you I am he, Jesus said. And since I'm the one you want, let these others go. Okay. I mean, you can kind of see why we don't always highlight that around Easter. Because, I mean, Jesus just knocks over an army of people somehow. like spiritually or something. I'm not sure. For background, the exact specific word here for the amounts of soldiers there are, I don't know how you picture it in your head. I asked 70 this morning, like, how many people do you picture arrested Jesus? And she's like, I don't know, not very many, like, less than 100 probably. Here's like the Me Too, like in my head, I think it's probably because I've watched like Passion plays. And, that's the extras. You make the extras Roman soldiers. If you've been in a Passion play and they made you a Roman soldier and you just found out that you were an extra, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to be the one to break that to you, but you were not a leading role in this play. Jesus was the lead. Pilate was probably somewhere important, Peter. But Roman number 11 that you got with no lines? Listen, I know your mom was proud of you, and that's awesome. Perfect. Okay, that's what matters. The word here that's translated like contingent or it's cohort in some it's 600. 600. The Pharisees seem to know something. Like, I think about this. I wonder if the soldiers, like, you're going to arrest one dude and there's 600 of you. I wonder if they were like, what are we walking into? That you need 600 of us, and there's one guy. Like, why not send one of us? Like, what? The Pharisees seem to understand that there's a principle here. They seem to get that if Jesus doesn't want to, come with them, he's not going to come with them. And they show up and like, who are you looking for? And Jesus is like, I'm the guy you're looking for. And they just fall down with the words, I am he. And I don't know if that's a reference to the Old Testament, like I am. Like, I don't. All I know is Jesus says, I'm the guy you're looking for, and everybody collapses. I can't explain it better than that, other than to say this. If Jesus with a word can make 600 soldiers collapse, the Pharisees were right. He's not going with them if he doesn't feel like it. And what he seems to be doing is dictating the terms of his own arrest. It ends by saying, he's like, look, I'm the one you're looking for. These are my buddies. They're not who you're looking for. They're going to go home tonight and sleep in their beds. I will go with you. They will not. And Jesus wasn't asking. This was not a request. He did not file paperwork. He knocked them all down on the ground, making them pick themselves up hilariously like turtles in their Roman armor. And as they got themselves back up, he said, okay, now that you're standing again, you will let these people go, and I will go with you. And first and foremost, this shows an astounding amount of power by Jesus. Like, he just says, it's me. And he can handle an army of people. The man who can control the weather is also a man who can defeat armies. Because Jesus can do anything. There is no power Jesus does not have. None. Every power in heaven and earth, he talks about, all authority has been given to me. There is no power that Jesus does not have. He can do anything. And what that means is that if nothing else, we should understand that the good news of the gospel is shown in what Jesus did, but it's also shown in what Jesus did not do. For example, when Judas showed up, the man who was going to betray him with a kiss, Jesus did not make him explode. He didn't. He didn't make all his internal organs just stop and quit right like that. Didn't just like melt both of his hands off, so he's a man with stumps for hands. He didn't do any of that. Think about the crazy things you might do to a man who's killing you. If you have unlimited power, he did none of those things. Nothing. He also didn't kill the soldiers. He knocked them over. He was sending a message, right? That was Jesus, by the way. That was him like baring his teeth, like I don't want to use them and I'm not planning on it, but I need you to know they're there. Okay? Because I want my friends to go. That's everything we're doing here. I am making darn sure I am the only one that's arrested here and not my friends. Jesus bore his teeth, but he didn't actually bite. There's another fancy way of saying that Jesus doesn't just kill all the sinners, or every time somebody does a bad thing, just punish them endlessly. Jesus could do anything, and yet he shows a restraint that you and I would never show were we in his shoes. And the good news of the gospel is shown in the fact that Jesus goes to the cross without decimating the nation of Rome. He goes through trials with the Sanhedrin without bringing the entire temple down on top of them. Jesus can fight back in whatever way he wants, and he does not. Instead, what he does, with all of the power that he has and all of the authority that he has, is he shows love and compassion and mercy. Every man who was knocked over, well, they've got a story to tell. And within the next 25, 30 years or so, the church is going to be in their backyard. And they're going to have some decisions to make about what might we do with this Jesus fella. Everybody standing there is given the chance to come to faith because Jesus gave them that chance. His disciples, he made sure the disciples were safe so they could spread the gospel to all nations. All of this led to Jesus going to the cross where he could die for the sins of all humanity, providing salvation for every single human being that has ever existed, raising from the dead, bringing new life to every single human person that's ever existed. Everything he does as he exercises his power is to the good of you and me. And it's interesting because the disciples in Luke 8, Mark 4, you might recognize those numbers are low. Like relative, Luke has 24 chapters or whatever it is, and Matthew has 16, and we're early in the ministry. Early on, the disciples see this miracle. They see the storm. They see Jesus doing this stuff. They see Jesus is asleep with a cushion. They see all this stuff, and it freaks them out, and they think, "Oh no, what might happen here?" But once we get through the cross, once we get through Gethsemane, once we get through the resurrection, once we get to where the people are writing these stories and they're leaving them behind for us, for you and for me, for Carl Broberg, for all of those people, in everything we're doing, we can see that at no point has Jesus exercised his power in a way that is not loving. And the reason is, without getting too philosophical here, is I'm not totally sure he can. I know, I shouldn't have said that. That was not even in the sermon. I just threw it out there. But see, here's the deal. If Jesus is God, and he is, and if God is love, and he is, then Jesus is love, and he is, then everything Christ does is an expression of love. And so we can sing "How Great Thou Art" without the fear. We can be inspired, awe-inspired by who God is, without also on the back end saying, "But what if?" Like we are able to do that because in all that Christ has done, particularly at the cross, in the resurrection, as he dealt with his enemies, the people who were doing it, what we can see is that in all things that Christ does as he expresses his power, that those are also things that are expressions of love, because Jesus is God and God is love. And that is very good news for us, because we are called to trust and obey and follow. We are called to be people who don't choose our own way, we choose God's way. We are called to be people who align ourselves so much with Christ that what happens with Christ is what happens with us. We are called to be those people. And we can choose those things. We can make those choices, knowing that we don't have to be afraid the way the disciples were. They were afraid, and they had a good reason to be afraid. They weren't sure of the things we can be sure of. But now that we can be sure of them, we can sing how great thou art, and we can live the message of that song, understanding that Christ has all of this power. And he uses all of this power to express all of this love. We're in the second week of our series called The Songs We Sing, Volume 3. As we talk about how great thou art, we talk about storms and fears and everything else. We come to a conclusion that we can only come to on this side of the cross, but it's a vitally important conclusion for our life as Christians. And that conclusion is this. Second lesson from this series is this. Jesus can do literally anything, and with all his power, he has chosen to love and save us. Jesus can do literally anything, and with all of his power, he has chosen to love and to save us. We're going to sing a song. Musicians coming forward. We're going to sing a song. I'll bet you $1 you know what song we're going to sing. And we offer an invitation every week. And the invitation is to take out up on this offering. Repent to be baptized. Sounds like two things. It's really just one. In repentance, we say I'd like to change. And in baptism, we are aligning ourselves with Christ, just as he was dead, buried, and raised in water, metaphorically, spiritually, emotionally, all of the ways we join Christ. Just as he was dead, buried, and raised, we are dead, buried, and raised, and we will be dead, buried, and raised because we are his. Never made a decision like that? Let's talk. If you're an immersed believer in Christ, you're looking for a perfect church home, it's not here, but we do serve a perfect God. We want to connect, we want to call, we want to cultivate, we want to meet new people, share the gospel, we want to grow up while we do it. And we want to be people who are able to trust God, not in fear, but just seeing how great and amazing God is, because in all of his power, he has done nothing but show us all of his love. As we stand,